Good evening, Matinee Free Webinar. Warm welcome to Matinee Free Webinar. Our speakers, Mr. Matt and Mr. Ray, both are expert in education, and Mr. Matt is well known for emotional intelligence. He's running for last 30 more than 30 years. He's working for emotional intelligence, and Mr. Ray,
hoping to get some someday.
Yeah. And
Go ahead,
Ray is a teacher and he's also an educator, basically working with REBT, REB, and primary certification for REB. I taught freshers, particularly in schools, high schools, for the last 33 years. Now retired as a consultant, trainer, writer, and speaker. It's living in Chicago. And on behalf of you all, I welcome you, Mr. Matt and Mr. Ray. You are welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Dr. S, and welcome Ray, and welcome everybody else. We have some real practical stuff for you today. Ray has a way of putting things that is, you go, oh. See, my stuff is a little more theoretical, but his is more practical, and you can actually, if you think this, you might consider thinking this instead, and actually change the way you think, which change the way you feel, which change the way you act, probably, etc. It's fantastic stuff. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll get it started, and then we'll switch over to Ray in just a minute. Okay. So the subject today is, again, positive mental health. This is the point of this, is to have some positive mental health, not negative, but to positive, to switch it positive. And we can make our mental health positive. The more we learn about ourselves, and the more we learn about our emotions, the more we learn about our what's going on inside of us, we can spin it positive. We call it spin it to win it. So the first three steps of positive mental health are awareness. First, we got to be aware first. Next, we don't have to, but it's helpful to accept what's happening, accept ourselves, accept our thoughts, accept our feelings too, accept it, and accept responsibility for them. That's the biggest part of it. Accept responsibility that we made our thoughts and we made our feelings. They didn't do it to us. We did. We do it. That's probably our biggest point of this whole thing, is that we are in charge of us. We are in charge of our inner world. And that is a very big deal. And that is it sounds easy, but it's not. It can be very, very difficult. It can be painful. It can be problematic. And some of Ray's wonderful work is on acceptance, because what we're doing is we're saying they didn't do it, I did it. All right. I did it. And that's good, because that puts you in control. That puts you in charge of you. No matter what's happening outside, we have control of what happens inside. And we can accept that, or we cannot. And if we not, then we become a whiner, blamer, victim, and blah, blah, blah. But if you accept control of yourself, your emotional responsibility, then you can do all kinds of amazing things with your life, and with yourself, and with your relationships, and with your love, and with everything. So emotional acceptance is a huge part of this. And then you can take action on it or not. You can take action or not, right? First become aware, then we accept, then we can do something about it or not, right? If no action is often a good action with emotions. Sometimes, especially high emotions, no action is a good idea. Keep your mouth shut, or don't do it, or don't break that, or don't hit him, or that kind of stuff. Don't do the action. The cool part is that you are deciding, which means you are in control. You're deciding whether to take action or not. That puts you in control. That's a beautiful thing, right? So let's start. So awareness, acceptance, action. All right. So awareness. Let's start with a very, very basic awareness right now. And this is what we do in schools, is what we do with little kids, is we do with big kids. What are you feeling? Simple awareness. What are you feeling right now? Go inside and see. Check it out. We can't tell you, only you know. And then accept that. Okay. Then accept that. We call it name it to tame it. It's very helpful a lot of times just to be able to identify what the heck we're feeling. And we're not very good at it. We're not very good at it. We don't have practice in doing this. We don't learn it in schools. We don't do it at home. We better not do it at work, right? That kind of thing. So we are not very good at this. So we start with the basics. So you can feel more than one thing at a time. So you can pick 2 or 3 off of this list, or 12 if you want to. All right. And figure out what you're feeling. It helps a lot. It helps you make sense of you. It helps you understand yourself better. Here's a cool one that we use in classes a lot is simple is what are you feeling? A lot of times the teachers, they found this one of the most powerful exercises teachers do in their classes is just simply put this on the board and say, okay, let's go around the room. What are you feeling? What are you feeling? Not how. How says mostly gets a physical response, right? They'll say, oh, I'm tired or my arm hurts or whatever. You get a physical response, but what are you feeling is a different question, a much better question. All right. So figure it out for yourself. What are you feeling right now? And I just wanted to put a little note in is that we are talking about positive mental health, which means that our mental health is often negative, right? And there's a negative to it, right? There's painful. It can be ugly. It can be we can be depressed. We can be angry. We can be anxious. We can be sad. We can be afraid. All that stuff. If we can deal with those, if we can learn how to deal with those properly and effectively, we can have all kind of positives. We can switch it, we can process them, we can change them into positives. So learning how to deal with our negatives is one of the main keys to positive mental health. We got to learn how to deal with our negatives so that we can spin them positive. So, okay, so that's quick background. Now let's get into it. Self-awareness and self-acceptance. Self-awareness and self-acceptance. This is now we're going to switch this over to Ray. We're talking about looking at ourselves, and I found one of my favorite sayings lately has been apparently. Think about that word. If you start a sentence with apparently, that means that you took a look at something, you're aware of it. Maybe apparently you accepted it because apparently you're like, okay, all right, I guess that's what's happening. And then you add the word I. So you go, apparently I do this. Apparently I feel this way. Apparently I'm having this thought. All right. It's just learning about yourself. That's self-reflection and self-acceptance. The first 2 steps at the same time. You do not have to take any action. You don't, or you can. So this is the start of Ray's. So I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to switch over to him. Go ahead.
Okay. Find that. And from
Apparently,
beginning.
I do this. There we go.
There you go. Okay, yeah. So Matt asked me to talk about awareness and also in parentheses there, reflection. And as we go through this, we always encourage in REBT and REBE, we always encourage people to begin with to have what we call unconditional self-acceptance, which just happens to be USA. What it means is to choose to see whatever you think, feel, say, or do, have in the past or might in the future as part of being human and understandable given what your life experiences have been so far and what you have to deal with at the moment. Part of being human, the best way to explain that is you'll never be the first or last human being in human history to think, feel, say, or do something, which suggests you have a lot of company, which suggests that it's part of being human. And understandable means just that if we put other people through exactly the same life experiences you've been through, there's a pretty good chance they'd end up thinking, feeling, saying, and doing much the same things you do. And some might fare better, some might fare worse, but most people would probably come out pretty much the same way. Now, so I'm going to ask a couple questions here to get us started and have you reflect a little bit and just think about this. Do you ever get more upset than ends up seeming helpful? And of course, you could answer never, hardly ever, sometimes, fairly often, or all the time. The second question, do you get angry at people around you? And again, never, hardly ever, sometimes, fairly often, or all the time. A third question, do you feel stressed, anxious, or worried? And again, it could be never, hardly ever, sometimes, fairly often, or all the time? Do you feel sad or depressed? And again, it could be never, hardly ever, sometimes, fairly often, or all the time. Now, do you feel ashamed or guilty? And shame comes from believing that you don't live up to expectations, either other people's or your own. And we all have all kinds of expectations on us, placed on us from the very beginning of our life, and we place a lot more on ourselves. So there's a lot of opportunity to feel shame. And many times shame is the primary feeling people struggle with and seek relief from. To explain all this, how this works, I always like to start by saying energy or emotion, emotion is energy to move. And the purpose of it, evolutionary wise, was to help us deal with threats and help us get what we want and need. Now, the problem is that people too often imagine or manufacture threats where they don't or need not exist. And they magnify threats that do exist out of proportion to reality. And that's what I'm going to try to explain today, how people do that as we talk about this. Now, first thing is to start by asking you to reflect on just how do you talk about your feelings and the way they come about? And how the people around you talk about their feelings and how they come about. Do you say things like this, for example, he really makes me angry. That really stresses me out, or that's really depressing, or she makes me feel so guilty, or he really hurt my feelings when he said or did that. Okay. Now, if you talk like that, that's called having an external locus of control. Locus of control is, the meaning of that is where you see your feelings coming from, what you see as the cause of them. And you can have an internal or external locus of control. Now, the problems with talking this way, these ways I just suggested, is that it puts you at the seeming and needless mercy of others and what they say and do and what happens. It suggests others in life must change for the better for you to feel better. In other words, people have to start treating me better in order for me to feel better because they make me feel good or bad. Now, that's one of the things, and external locus control is what makes people susceptible to a demagogue, like we're seeing happening in many parts of the world today. Because if you think that other people make you feel bad, the reverse of that is that other people make you feel better. So you reach out to other people. Some people do that to religion and have gods they seek to make them feel better. And then we have people who seek politicians who want to do that. Now, the other thing about talking that way, it typically leads to you feeling worse than is necessary or helpful. And more importantly, perhaps, is that you miss opportunities to feel better. And the other part of it, the last part of that is you see others as the cause of how you feel. If you look at things that way, therefore you see them as a threat. And that's why you might get angry with them and perhaps attack them in some way. Now, the way life really works, though, there's a simple formula for the way life really unfolds. It's event plus thoughts equals feelings, and feelings give rise to behavior. Now, so a couple of things we could say about this formula. Anything others say or do or what happens is an event. Thoughts cause feeling, not events. An attitude or thought is always the father of behavior, and your behavior will tend to follow your feelings toward your life events. If you feel angry, you're likely to act the way human beings usually act when they get angry, be aggressive. If you feel sad, you're likely to act the way human beings feel when they're sad. Now, what this formula tells us is it's really your choice how you want to feel. Now, someone said that to me a long time ago, and I thought, what? How's that true? And he explained it to me, and it has to do with Dr. Ellis's ABC theory of emotions. And the way it works is this. There's always more than one way to look at anything. I don't care what happens. There are always multiple ways you can look at it. There's a severe earthquake in Turkey right now. Those people are going to be struggling emotionally with what they have to deal with. No matter how bad it gets, there's always more than one way you can look at things. Some people will find some good ways and other people will struggle. Some ways will make us feel better. Others will make us feel worse. Some ways make it easier to deal with what we don't like and others harder. And because thoughts cause feelings, not events, that's why, and you always have a choice how you want to look at things. Therefore, to a large extent, you do have a choice how you want to feel. Okay, obviously, whatever way you might choose to feel is understandable and part of being human, but you have a lot more choice than people realize. Now, here are some more semantically correct and scientifically correct ways to talk about feelings. For example, no one upsets me, I upset myself. It's my choice how I want to feel. Now imagine if you're starting to get upset and you said, whoa, wait a minute, it's my choice how I want to feel. No one upsets me, I upset myself, because it's my choice how I want to look at things. Now, the other one I used to teach students is I'm responsible for how I feel, not others. And it's not their job to make me feel better, it's mine. Now that may seem, that's actually something some people might be afraid of or leery of, but actually that's good news, because that means it gives you power and control over your emotional destiny, how you're going to feel in the next couple of moments, minutes, hours, days, weeks, and months. Now, I want to talk specifically about one thing that happens, other people's comments, because we just had a young girl take her own life in America, and that's not the first one, obviously. There's been a lot more. She was 14 years old and being bullied at school, and she ended up in her own life instead of living out another 40, 50, 60 years. So do you feel hurt or get angry when others make negative comments about you? Do others' negative comments hook you? And by that, I mean, I always saw, hook you. It's like fishing, like they're fishing, throw some bait out there and you grab that bait like a largemouth bass and you get hooked by it. And do you find yourself ruminating about what they said long afterward? And do others' negative comments cause you to have self-doubt or even self-hate? Now, what I want to say about the phrase, you hurt my feelings, is you can't hurt feelings, and this is why. Have you ever seen a feeling? Obviously, the answer is no. You've seen what people look like when they have a feeling, but you've never seen an actual feeling because it's an internal biological chemical event, electrical event. Now, have you ever held one in your hand? Of course, the answer is no. So if you can't see one and you can't hold it in your hands, how can you hurt someone? So really, the saying, you hurt my feelings, is really nonsensical in a lot of ways, because you just can't do that. Sometimes people feel hurt because of what they choose to think about the other person and what they're saying, but you can't hurt feelings. It just doesn't work that way. Now, one of the things I try to teach people, because it's your choice how you want to feel and how you want to look at things, this is the way I encourage people to respond to other people's negative comments, is to just stipulate, first of all, you can think, feel, say, and do whatever you want to about me. That's your choice. You have that choice. I have no control over that. You can think bad things about me if you want to, but it's my choice in the end, how I look at myself and how I feel about myself. And you don't get to make those choices for me unless I let you. And a lot of people do let other people make those choices for them. And that's understandable and part of being human to do that. And last part is, and I choose not to. Okay. Now, if you memorize that and practice that, it eventually become an automatic way of you responding to criticism of other people, and it would protect you. It would be like putting on a suit of armor. Now, do you ever try to control what others think, feel, say, or do? A lot of people talk and think as if they have control of other human beings. And so the answer here is never, hardly ever, sometimes, fairly often, all the time. I was a teacher. A lot of teachers think and act as if they control. They'll say things like, that kid's going to do what I tell him. And I sit there and think, not really, but okay. Anyways, this is how I like to explain this. I call it the circle of conflict. If you take that formula I gave you and just write it twice around a circle, split the circle into two halves, one is you and one is them. Whatever you say or do is an event for other people. Whatever they say or do is an event for you, and you generate thoughts about that. And then that might cause feelings like anger, and then you say or do something back, and that's a new event for them. And you get going around this circle, and pretty soon it can escalate pretty quickly and be World War III. Now, the question I have, though, is which half of the circle do you have control over? And I've never had anybody get this wrong. When you look at it this way, laid out on paper, it's the only half you really control is you. You really never control the other half. You never really control what other people think, feel, say, and do. You can influence what they do, but you never really control it. Ultimately, in the end, they have the same choice you have to think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to. Now, so there are some facts of life that I think it's important to practice and rehearse telling yourself. I can't and don't control what others think, feel, say, or do. Others can think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to. Oh, the dog barking. So no one has to do anything, least of all what I want. The only person I control is me, what I think, feel, say, or do. And quite frankly, for most people to learn to control your own thoughts, feelings, and actions, that's a big enough job without trying to take on other people. Now, to explain a little bit more about how people make themselves feel worse than they'd like to, I just like to use the quote from William Shakespeare that expectation is the root of all heartache. Now, and the reason that's important is because there's a rule I have, it's called rule number 2. The greater the difference between your expectations and reality, or at least what you perceive to be reality, the greater the perceived threat will be, and the more emotion or energy to move you'll generate when you don't get what you want, or possibly lose it, or even if you just imagine doing neither. Now, so I would ask you this question to reflect: which verbs do you tend to use, to hear yourself using when you think about or talk to others? Do you use verbs like need to, or you have to, or you can't, or you should or shouldn't? Or do you instead use verbs like I want, I'd like, I'd prefer, I'd rather, I wish? Okay. The reason that one of the other versions of that, sometimes you can make that kind of demands in a question called how dare you or how could you. What that basically means, when you're saying how dare you, you're basically saying you can't or you shouldn't. Now, I'm hearing politicians in America say that a lot. I have Vice President Harris saying, how dare they, pass these laws? Well, I sit there and think to myself, the answer, unfortunately, is easily. And they're people all over the country, legislatures are demonstrating it doesn't take a lot for them to pass some crazy laws. All they got to do is vote for it. Now, the reason that's important is because if you set your think thermostat up at need, have to, can't, should, and shouldn't, and use verbs like that, that creates a much bigger gap if you don't get what you want or you lose it than if you use verbs like want, like, prefer, rather, or wish. If I say I want something, or I'd like something, or I prefer you not do that, or I'd rather you not do that, and then somebody does, I'll be frustrated, irritated, or annoyed because there's a certain amount of threat. But if I raise it up to you literally have to, meaning you must do what I say and you can't do something I don't like, now when they do it, it creates a much bigger threat. So you're more likely to generate anger instead of just frustration, irritation, or annoyance. Now, Matt, I was talking to Matt about a program I'm working up and going to send to some people called Cognitive Overreaction Prevention, or COP. COP is an acronym for police officers in the United States. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because when you see by the way, I hate using these words black and white, because quite frankly, black and white are a form of what Albert Ellis called label and damning. They're overgeneralizations. There's no white people walking around. There's no black people walking around. People have a varying degree of melanin that they produce because of their ancestors and exposure to sun. And it's not an either or proposition. We don't have black or white people. We have some people who produce a lot of melanin, some people who produce very little, and a whole bunch of people somewhere in the middle. But we don't have black and white people. And it's using that label is just really part of the problem to begin with, okay? Because we're overgeneralizing about a group of people because of skin color. But anyways, when a white officer kills a black person needlessly, in hindsight, it looks like it was needlessly. He got stopped for a traffic stop, he ends up getting shot and ends up dead. Then it's easy to think race had something to do with that, and it may very well have. But what we saw recently is we had a young black man get killed by 5 black officers. Well, it's hard to talk about race then, but what we're seeing in all these cases is what I would call a behavioral overreaction. And the reason we're seeing that behavioral overreaction is because we have police officers emotionally overreacting. And my whole point is they receive a lot of training, but all their training is behavioral in nature. not cognitive. So what's happening is these officers are overreacting cognitively, which sets them up to overreact emotionally and then to overreact behaviorally. And part of it is because they set their thermostats at have to and can't. And they have probably people who get attracted to the job of policing, probably have what we call an authoritarian mindset, where their way of looking at life is to think that people have to do what I tell them. They can't, disobey me or disregard what I say. They have to obey laws. They have to do all these things. So when somebody doesn't do what they want, they're more likely to overreact with anger and then overreact behaviorally. And that's why we get the killings we do. So my whole goal is to try to create a program to teach them cognitively how to turn their think thermostat down. Now, the questions I would or encourage you to ask yourself when you hear yourself saying they have to, or you just want them to. In other words, where do you want to set your thermostat? Do you want to set it at have to? You want to set it at want to? They have to, or you just like them to? And if you're saying using the verb can't or shouldn't, you would ask, they can't, or you just don't want them to? They can't, or you just wouldn't like them to? And the only real correct answers to these questions are, they don't have to, I just want them to. Because no one has to do anything. My grandfather taught me a long time ago, no one has to do anything except die and pay taxes. And there's only half of that is right. A lot of people don't pay taxes, including our former president. Now, and as far as what people can do, think, feel, say, and do whatever they want to. That's just a fact of life. Now, that said, you have a right to want whatever you want. That's every human being's right. The mistake people make is to turn their think thermostat up to thinking people have to do what I want. They can't do things I don't like or don't want them to. Now, which verbs do you hear yourself using when you feel stressed out or anxious? Now, what anxiety is a figment of imagination. It's about things that could happen but haven't happened yet and often never do. And the way we set ourselves up for that, we can make demands of either ourselves or life. And when you're getting really stressed out or feeling anxious, more than likely you're going to hear yourself using the verb have to or can't instead of want to or don't want to. So you'll say, I have to do well on this test tomorrow. That might be what a student will say. I can't get anything wrong, or I can't get an F. I can't make a lot of mistakes, or everything has to go right tomorrow. Nothing can go wrong. And that's how you set yourself up. Instead of just saying, I'd like, or I want everything to go well. I want to get an A on this test, or I don't want to fail this test. By doing that, you create a much bigger gap between your expectations and reality. So if or when you do have a bad outcome, which you may have because of anxiety, because anxiety causes you to want to plug into your flight response, the one half of your fight or flight response. And if you're busy trying to flee a situation, it's really hard to perform at the level you're capable of. So you've kind of set yourself up in the beginning, and then it does turn out badly. And then we'll talk about what happens after that. So the questions you would ask here, there's another slide here. So when you say I have to or I can't, you predispose yourself to have anxiety, perhaps a very high frequency, intensity, and duration of it. And then people sometimes do it so much that we say they have anxiety disorders, because it's way out of proportion to what they need to deal with situations. On the other hand, if you simply turn your thermostat down to I want to or I don't want to instead, you're likely to have concern, but not anxiety. Now, so the questions I would ask you in those situations, you have to or just want to? You have to or just like to? Or you can't or just don't want to? You can't or just wouldn't like to? Now, which verbs do you hear yourself using when you feel ashamed or guilty? You know, it's good to stop and listen to your own self-talk or what you're saying out loud. Do you use words like should or shouldn't? Dr. Elwood Ellis used to call this shoulding on yourself. You basically are telling yourself you should have or shouldn't have done something. And that'll either make you, or you could say, I should be better, I should be doing better than I am. That'll make you feel either shame or guilt. Whereas instead, you could be saying, I wish I had, or I wish I hadn't. And you'll feel regret and remorse, which could be very helpful energy to move, cause you to make some changes, make amends to people you think you might have wronged in some way. But when you have shame and guilt, it has very often the opposite effect. It makes you want to hide what you think, feel, say, and do, and you're less likely to seek out other people to make amends. So which verbs do you tend to use? Now, so, because like I said, using should or shouldn't, we call that shoulding on yourself. That will cause shame and guilt. Whereas if you just said, I wish I had, or I wish I hadn't, you'd get regret or remorse. Now, so which verbs do you hear yourself using when you feel sad or depressed? Do you hear yourself saying things, and I have a whole list coming up. Do you use the verb should, shouldn't, has to, or can't? Or do you just use wish? And for example, this shouldn't be happening to me, or I shouldn't have to deal with this. It should or has to be easier than this. It shouldn't or can't be so hard. Now imagine if the people in Ukraine were thinking this way and talking this way to themselves and each other. Well, there'd be a lot more depression than there probably is already. On the other hand, it's perfectly understandable to think, I wish this wasn't happening to me. I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I wish it was easier. I wish it wasn't so hard. You'll still have some sadness because things aren't the way you'd like them to be. But by turning it up to shouldn't or should or can't or has to, it makes you more likely to be depressed and have much more energy to move. Depression doesn't seem like energy to move, but it has the same effect on people. When people get really depressed, instead of sad, they're more likely to react to life in ways, for example, suicide might be one way of reacting to life in that situation. Now, how do you talk? Now, there's a couple other types of thinking that Dr. Ellis identified. One was called awfulizing. So how do you tend to look at adversity in your life? Do you use words like awful, horrible, and terrible? And I hear people do this all the time publicly on the news reports. It's really awful, it's horrible, it's terrible. Well, a lot of things in life are simply unpleasant, inconvenient, and uncomfortable. And if you say things are, just simply acknowledge that things are unpleasant, inconvenient, and uncomfortable to some degree, you'll be frustrated, you'll have concern, you'll have some sadness, you'll have regret, remorse. But if you tell yourself it's awful, terrible, and horrible, and sometimes some things are, losing a child, for example, what people are going through in Ukraine or in Turkey right now, or Syria, that's about as bad as it gets for human beings. But a lot of other things in life just simply are unpleasant, inconvenient, and uncomfortable. But if you raise your thermostat up to awful, horrible, and terrible, you're going to make yourself feel anger, anxiety, depression, shame, or guilt. Now, for example, you'll say things like, that's really awful, that's really horrible, that's really terrible, instead of things like, well, it's not that big a deal, worse things have happened, it's not the end of the world, which would be a way of saying it's unpleasant, inconvenient, uncomfortable. Now, so the questions we would ask is it awful or just unpleasant? Is it awful or just inconvenient? Is it awful or just uncomfortable? And hopefully that would encourage you to bring your thermostat down to say, well, yeah, it's not awful. It's not the worst possible thing that could be happening. It's just unpleasant, inconvenient, or uncomfortable. A lot of things in life are. All right. Now, do you hear yourself saying that you can't stand things that happen? Now, I hear people saying that too. I can't stand this. I can't stand that. I can't stand when people talk to me that way. That's called can't stand it-itis. Dr. Ellis named it that way, put the itis at the end, which means inflammation, because when you tell yourself you can't stand something you simply don't like, you needlessly inflame yourself. So that's why he called it can't stand it-itis. Now, and if you do that, you're going to end up with anger instead of frustration or irritation or annoyance. You're going to end up with anxiety instead of concern, depression instead of sadness, regret, remorse, shame or guilt instead of regret or remorse. Now, so the simple question you ask there is, you can't stand it or just don't like it. Hopefully people will say, I can stand it, I just don't like it. Okay. Now that given that, there's one of the other rules I teach is you have a right to like or dislike whatever you want to. The problem again is because you turn your thermostat up to can't stand it. Now, another question, do you find yourself condemning the doer instead of the deed? Do you label and damn people? Do you call them names? Put them down? Now, do you overgeneralize about people, about making somebody out to be something much more than they really are just because of one little part of them or something they've said or done? Now, if you do that, you're more likely to generate anger. If you simply dislike the behavior, you're more likely just to be simply frustrated, irritated, annoyed that somebody's doing something you don't want. Now, teachers are taught when they do reports, you never put down things like this kid was disrespectful. You put down what he said. He told me to go F off, and then leave it to everyone else to decide what they want to make it at. But if you put down that he's disrespectful, that's your subjective interpretation, because what's subjective to one person or disrespectful to one person may not be to someone else. Now, so the question you would ask here is, are they whatever, stupid, an idiot or whatever, or did they just do something you didn't like? You have every right to like or dislike what other people say or do. But when you label and damn them, you overgeneralize about them. You condemn them as a person instead of just their deed. So we're trying to get you just to bring it down. Look, fine, I don't like what he did. Okay, well, let's do something about that. Let's talk about that. Let's see what we can fix, change that. Now, the last part of this is talk about you messages versus I messages. Now, you messages are also called solution messages because examples like orders, threats, or put downs, or name calling, especially orders and threats or commands, like a police officer might say, show me your hands, get down on the ground. Those are also called solution messages because you're trying to take away from another human being their right to think, feel, say, and do whatever they want to. And usually that will trigger a negative response, usually some kind of rebellion or defiance. It's just innate. And it's just almost automatic for some people more than others. Some people will comply, other people will just, coil like a rattlesnake and be ready to strike out with venom. Now, iMessages, on the other hand, simply give others information, what you would like or dislike, for example, or what you want or don't want. And it leaves it up to them what they want to do about that information. Now, if you're going to point any finger, usually you'd be pointing your finger at yourself because you're saying, I would like you to stop doing that, versus you better stop doing that right now. Nobody likes a finger pointed at them. Well, in this case, you're pointing a finger at yourself. Now, so which do you hear yourself using when conflicting with others? Do you use I messages or do you use you messages? Because you messages are less likely to be effective. Now, there's a technique we call putting your verbal behavior where you want your attitude to be. And simply what it means is practice talking the way you want to think. Now, if you use verbs like need to, have to, can't, should, or shouldn't, and then people don't do what you'd like or want them to, you're more likely to have anger. And then you're more likely to impulsively use you messages and orders, threats, commands, name calling, put downs. Well, what you want to do here is practice I messages. I don't like when you do that. I would like you to stop doing that. Okay. And then what happens is eventually is that affects your attitude in a positive way. So you're more likely now to have your thermostat set at want, like, prefer, rather, or wish, and then just be simply frustrated, irritated, or annoyed, which allows you to respond in the best possible way. And the best possible way to respond to any conflict is with I messages, because they're only giving information, leaving it up to the other person what they're going to do about it. Okay. I think that's the end of my presentation. So, Matt, back to you. Stop share. There you go. There we go. Oh, am I muted here? I think you're muted, Matt.
There we go. Sorry. There. Thanks, Ray. That was great stuff. Super practical as always. Don't think this, think this. It's super simple. don't believe this, believe this. And to be more emotionally intelligent, to help with our positive mental health, etc. Try and do it different. So that's very, very helpful. I appreciate your I was taking notes as usual while you were talking, and I we'll be using it in the future, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. So let me just sum up here. This is some stuff I got from one of your old ones, Ray. Ray's got, you want to talk a little bit? These next 3 slides are yours.
Oh,
So let
okay.
me give you credit.
Yeah. Well, there is a book out there I wrote that look, it's your choice how you want to feel. And it's very simple, hopefully easy to read, because I taught 14-year-olds for 33 years. So hopefully I don't want to say dumb it down, but I bring it down to some way that they can easily understand. And 14-year-olds can understand it. Hopefully adults can. Now I sell it. It's on a sale on Amazon.com. I guess there's a US version of that, also an Indian version of that. It's $8.99 US, which is really cheap. But I also, if somebody's a teacher or a counselor or something like that, or a mental health professional, I can make copies available for $3.15 a piece. I can get up to 500 copies printed at a time. And then I just have to ship them somewhere. I don't know if I can ship them directly to somebody or not, but that's okay. What's the next slide, Matt? You said there were 2 others. Okay. Yeah, I have a couple Facebook pages. One is called Mental Health Education for America. And of course, it's for everybody. It just happens to be for America because they're complaining about the mental health of America at this point. So I wrote it for that. It's your choice how I want to feel. And the other one is Mental Health Education for Mesa County, which is the county I live in Colorado and beyond. All right, the next slide, you said there was one more, Matt? All right, if you ever have any questions, my email is naturesmasterpieces@yahoo.com. I'm a pretty avid nature photographer, so that's why I use that email, naturesmasterpieces@yahoo.com. Okay, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, you bet. I like for people to be able to get a hold of you. And like I said, I love your stuff. It's so practical. Like you said, if 14-year-olds can do it, then even us adults can do it, maybe. Maybe. But it's just such a simple way of shifting your thinking, which shifts everything. So beautiful stuff. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, there's an old saying
questions
about
coming through.
there's an old saying about, progress never is made until you learn to ask the right questions in science. And really, that's what this is about. Ask the right question. Do they have to, or you just want them to? Why can't they? They can't, or you just don't want them. So if you learn to ask the right question and keep it as simple as possible, you're in good shape. And then you make some progress. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. What are you saying? Say that quote about progress again?
That progress never occurs until somebody learns to ask the right questions. Well, why is this happening? And what is causing this? And that's pretty much how people make, that's how scientists work. And then they come up with a hypothesis and they test that. Okay, well, if that's what Ellis used to always ask people, where's your evidence that people have to do what you want them to? Because when you say they have to do what I tell them to, that's your personal theory or hypothesis about how life is or should be. Well, where's your evidence? Show me the evidence that people have to do what you want them to, and that they can't do things you don't like. And of course, there is none. Okay, but that's one of Ellis's favorite quotes was, where's your evidence? So he's asking the right question. He's being a scientist. You have this hypothesis or theory about life that somebody has to do what you want, or things can't be the way you don't like, can't be happening to you. Where's your evidence that that's true? And of course, there is none.
Yeah. The biggest one that I hear is, I can't take this anymore. I can't do this anymore, which of course is not true, but that people tell themselves that. And then sometimes, all right, I can't take this anymore. And that's,
if you were 80 years old with terminal cancer and in pain all the time, that may be true. I'll buy that. I'm not going to argue with you. It's your experience. But on the other hand, if you're a 14-year-old kid and say, I can't take this anymore, that's not a fact. That's an opinion. Because if you really can't take something, you die or go crazy. And people say, I can't take things all the time. We don't see a lot of dead bodies going around because of that. Okay. So people can stand things, they just don't like it. And that's their right as human beings. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing with you. My response usually for people, I can't take this anymore, is sure you can. You've been doing it for a long time. You could keep doing it. You could. You may choose not to, but you could. And they
Most
go,
people
oh
are a
yeah,
lot-
you're right.
Most people are a lot stronger mentally and emotionally than they realize. A lot of people are finding that
Yeah.
out in Syria, Turkey, and Ukraine right now. They're doing things they never thought or could imagine they would ever do. And I think you even hear that when you hear news reports from Ukraine, for example. People who are just living their normal life are out there fighting now for their life and for freedom, and sometimes not making it. But they're doing things they never thought they could do.
Good point. That's a good way to put it. People are stronger. Would you say stronger, more
Well,
resilient than they
people
think they
are
are?
a lot stronger than they usually give them credit for. And, you know, when we live like we're living in modern society, like in the United States, it's so easy in so many ways. Obviously not for everyone, but compared to what human beings have lived throughout history, we're living, you know, like a golden life. We're living like kings of the old days. And what happens is everybody starts to do more awfulizing. Everybody starts to be more demanding, and they start to tell themselves they can't stand things they simply don't like. It actually lowers your frustration tolerance. Okay. And they have low frustration tolerance because of modern life. And then people are more likely to generate a lot of emotional disturbance that people in the past just didn't do because they just sucked it up and dealt with it because they had to. The other choice wasn't a very good one. So nowadays, though, as things get easier, you'll see people become more demanding, and they'll awfulize more, and they'll also tell themselves they can't stand things more. And that causes them to be a lot more upset about little things. And, you know, the old saying, don't sweat the big stuff and it's all, or don't sweat the big thing, or something like that. It's all little stuff or something. Well, don't sweat the little stuff. It's all little stuff. Well, a lot of it is, not all of it is, but a lot of it is.
Right on. Right on. You also said you learn to respond to life in the best way possible, learning to respond. And that's a beautiful thing, because that is positive mental health in a nutshell. It's learning to respond, not react in the best way possible, to respond in the best way possible. That's positive mental health, right?
You know, with police officers, for example, they receive all this behavioral training, but the catch is it only works. You can only plug into that training if you're in the right mental and emotional place. If you generate anger, you do what people who are angry do. They lash out and they become aggressive and everything else. So you've got to be in the right mental and emotional place to access and act on any advice you've been given, or to consider consequences before acting, or to behave in the best possible way, like using iMessages. Well, if people get angry, they're more likely to use you messages, if nothing else, because they've practiced doing that many times in the past.
Right on. Right on. Yeah, that's great stuff.
You remember the word
Very good, very
responsible?
good.
I like to break the word responsible up in two words: response hyphen able, because that emphasizes that it means you're able to respond to life in the best possible way. Responsibility is the ability to respond to life in the best possible way, rather than react or overreact. Okay.
Nice. Okay, Dr. S, I think we're done. Any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, compliments?
Yes.
Catastrophes?
Any questions? Any questions, please?
No, the class is very good. So I appreciate for the class.
So actually, it is a
Me
very
too.
practical based class. How anger is generated, and what are the even simple words also explained by Mr. Ray. It's really a wonderful class. What Mr. Matt has told, you are a little theoretical, and he is purely practical. That's very, very nice. Yes.
Yep.
Anybody else have any
stuff.
doubts or anything to explain? So only one book is there, Mr. Ray? Only one book is there, or you have?
Well, there's a bunch of other ones, but that's the latest one. I also wrote a book entitled How to Stop Being a Racist and Encourage Someone Else to, which I think a lot of people should read because, you know, racism is one of the types of irrational thinking Ellis called label and damning. You overgeneralize. It's like calling an apple bad because it has a bruise. And what people do when they engage in racist thinking is they're overgeneralizing. They're saying that group has some bad apples, so the whole group is bad. That person's part of the group, so they must be a bad apple. So basically, you're overgeneralizing about people, and in this case, simply because of skin color, but it could be because of religion, because of anything. And but that's, so I wrote that book. Basically, what I try to say in that book is we all have two innate tendencies that evolve to help us survive. One is to note and attend to differences between us and others, because differences are more likely to represent threats. You know, when gene pools were refined to fit environments very carefully, you wouldn't want somebody coming in and wrecking that gene pool, because that could be a threat to everybody. And the same is true for culture or religion or anything else. If you've got your own set of beliefs that's work for you, you don't want somebody coming in and disrupting that. That's a potential threat. So you're more likely to focus or note and attend to differences. The other thing is that we're more likely to generalize and often overgeneralize about our life experience. For example, if a woman was assaulted sexually by a man, it would be wrong for her to overgeneralize and think all men are a threat to her. But that's something she might very well do. Well, maybe somebody has an experience with somebody of a different skin color, but that doesn't mean every person with that skin color is a threat to you. But that's what people do with racist thinking, is to overgeneralize about people and sometimes an entire group because of it. And it's because of those two innate tendencies. I think we need to talk more, make people more aware of those two tendencies, because that's what's driving. That's what people who encourage people to be racist, that's what they tap into. They're encouraging you to say, look at all those ways they're different from you, instead of the ways we're all have in common. You know, starting at the DNA level, like all our DNA is probably 99.9% the same. We're the same as many other animals. And it's just a small part of that DNA makes us different. And a small part, I think it's 3 out of 10, or I can't remember if it's 10 or 30,000 genes. 3, I think, cause skin color or determine skin color. Well, what about all the 10,997 left? You know, they're the same. And same is true for what we want and desire. We all want the same kind of things. We want our family to be safe. We want to be loved. We want all those same things. We all have those things in common. People who come to America from other countries, they're not coming here just to make somebody's life miserable. They're coming here because they want the same things everybody else does, want their family to have a good life, a better life than they have already. Who wouldn't want to do that? But what people do is they encourage us to go with our innate tendencies, to note those differences and magnify those out of proportion to reality, instead of focusing on and noting all the things we have in common as human beings. It's like those Venn diagrams. Remember, we used to have a Venn diagram, there'd be overlap. Well, they're telling you to focus on the difference instead of the overlap. The overlap is much bigger than the difference. But what they can do is they cause you to focus on the differences and magnify those out of proportion to reality. And that's why you think groups of people or individuals are a bigger threat than you really are. Well, we've got to combat that. But first, you got to figure out what's going on. And that's what's going on. We got two innate tendencies, and people are encouraging. Some people do it on their own because of their own experience, but people are also out there encouraging people to go with those two tendencies. We've got to combat that. But first, we got to understand what we have to combat. I'm done.
Good points.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Very good explanation on practical basis. Thank you, Mr. Raya and Mr. Matt. Thank you. Once again, so this mental health is very important, and based on EQ and even practical basis. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. I thought because of Sunday, some people are a little less, because so many programs may be there on the Sunday. Anyway, thank you once again. We'll meet next week. most probably on Saturday, not in Sunday, better. Because
Yeah.
Saturday, I think it is more. Sunday, there will be some problem. So holiday is there, no? So naturally people will move from here to there. That's the problem. Anyway, thank you once again, Ray and Mr. Matt. Thank you very much. And we'll see you later. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, sir. Thanks for having us. Thanks
Thank you,
everybody
Matt.
for hanging in and listening to it.
Yep.
So, yep, positive mental health.